So originally when I was going to give this talk, it was going to be called Revive Incarceration, but that idea seemed a bit odd, so we switched it over to Revive Advocacy, so keep it safe. But I'm here today to tell you a story about a university, our university here in Princeton, that over the past 250 years has failed to live up to its responsibility as an institution of higher education and an institution of social good within the larger United States and global context. In doing so, I hope to reflect together on the ways in which we can work as a community, as individuals, and as a larger town to think about what it means to revive advocacy, to have social advocacy, and to push for social justice together. In doing so, let us return first to Princeton's history, to the beginnings, the roots of this place that we call home. In 1756, Aaron Burr Sr., the president of the Princeton University, which was at the time called the College in New Jersey, moved the university from Newark down to Princeton, where it has stayed ever since. In doing so, he brought with him his family, including his young son, Aaron Burr Jr., who would later become vice president, and his family's slave, Caesar, a middle-aged black man. In fact, Burr was not the first Princeton president or the only Princeton president to own slaves. Rather, from 1746, when the university was founded, until 1822, all of the 8 Princeton presidents owned slaves while presiding over the university. In doing so, they played into a larger narrative that was present within the town of Princeton of what it meant to be pro-slavery and what it meant to belong in an America in which the races were not equal. One Princetonian, Robert Finley, born, raised, and educated here in Princeton in the town and then the university, founded in 1816 the American Colonization Society. The American Colonization Society, or ACS as it's often known, was quick to attract attention from a number of high-profile individuals, including, as you can see here, James Madison, who was a Princeton undergrad himself and the first graduate student at Princeton. The colony played on an idea of the separation of races. Those who belonged to ACS advocated that blacks could only belong as slaves or in a separate, but in their mind, equal republic, a republic that would eventually become Liberia in Africa. There was a strong level of support both from Finley's friends and others within the Princeton community. One of them was the Stockton family, who some of you may be familiar with. Richard Stockton, a judge, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and one of the first trustees of Princeton University, or the College in New Jersey as was then known. His grandson, Commodore Robert Stockton, a member of the United States Navy, was also a prominent member of the Princeton community and heavily involved with the ACS. In fact, he led the first voyage of the ACS to Africa, and in doing so, negotiated the treaties with chiefs that eventually led to the creation of what we now know as Liberia. In addition to being active in the ACS, the Stocktons also found their place within the Princeton Township and the university, serving on boards and also owning a number of properties, including Morven Estate and Palmer House. Many of you may be familiar with are both down the road. In fact, both of these places housed slaves until the 1830s, and there is some evidence until even the 1840s. The Stocktons were not alone in their belief that slaves should be kept as slaves or separate from the rest of the white, better population. In doing so, they played into a larger narrative also present at the university. Charles Hodges, a theologian, a university trustee, and one of the most prominent members of the community in the 1830s and 40s, himself advocated for slavery in a number of essays that he published. Additionally, there was a larger discourse of ways in which the university could push itself to become better understanding the ways in which Princeton functioned through a separation of the races and, in fact, a shipping back to Africa. Today, however, we have the chance as a Princeton community to reflect back on the sins of our past, the ways in which the wealth gained from slavery helped to build a university which has a prestige answered by few throughout the world. However, I've found in my time at Princeton this has not always been the case. The Princeton Slavery Project, which myself, a number of other students, faculty, and staff are running at the university, seeks to look at the problems, or look at the causes of slavery and the ways in which those were affected with the Princeton University from the university's founding in 1846 until the Civil War. We have pushed to try to bring this message to the larger community, but in some aspects have found trouble. In one specific instance, we have struggled to find funding beyond the History Department and Mudd Archival Library. At other universities such as Brown, Harvard, the University of Virginia, the University of Maryland, there's been a large consensus from the central administration and the president of these institutions that slavery and the past links with institutional wealth should be something that's examined. In doing so, these presidents or central administrations have allocated direct funds to support the projects. At Princeton, that has not been achieved, and we have yet to achieve so. In doing so, I believe Princeton eschews its larger responsibility to understand its place in the world and its place looking forward. Now, if we fast forward to the 20th century, here is Princeton of View in 1856. If we fast forward to the 20th century, there's been a number of kind of movements on campus that have sought to rethink Princeton's place in the world. So in the 1970s, there was a large divest movement seeking to divest in companies that were working in apartheid South Africa. This is in 1974, I believe. and a number of kind of students of different colors spoke up and acted out in different ways, hoping to find some meaningful change. The university was heavily resistant to change, citing the lack of evidence and the lack that they felt that they would have any role in changing progress. Eventually, in 1985, the university would divest from a limited number of companies, but that was only after over 150 other colleges and universities had done so. More broadly, students of color, other minority students, have spoken out after becoming alumni of ways of which they themselves felt marginalized on campus. The most famous example that we probably have of this is Michelle Obama, class of 1985, who, as many of you know, has failed to return to the university, and in doing so has cited the uncomfortable way in which she felt perceived while there. However, if we fast forward to 2015 and think about Princeton in a global context, we realize that there's a number of problems that are causing our local, national, and global community much strife and much questioning of our own ideals. The events in Ferguson are just one such example. In doing so, Princeton does a very good job of pushing students to individually and to academically investigate the ways in which ties to the larger world problems can be solved. However, I believe that Princeton as a university fails to collectively look inside, to answer questions about what it means to be an institution within the larger world, to step up to the plate and say, we will courageously take a stance on social justice issues. In my mind, there's a divide between the issues over there, the problems that Princeton is able to analyze, to dissect, to make recommendations on, to say what's wrong with the things that other people are doing. But when it comes to problems here at home, problems that we ourselves have a responsibility to investigate and think about, we fail to do so as a university. So in 2015, there's a number of issues that many of you have thought about. One of them, which I spent a lot of time thinking about, and many of you are probably well aware, is the issue of mass incarceration in the United States. Statistics are familiar, 2.2 million people in prison, high racial biases, et cetera, et cetera. They go on and on. People from across the ideological spectrum are calling for change in a variety of manners, but all saying that something must go, something must be improved. Personally, here at Princeton, I've followed these debates closely as the leader of an organization called Students for Prison Education and Reform, or SPEAR, as we're more commonly known. In doing so, we have created kind of two types of outreach that SPEAR does on campus. One is events, and the other is advocacy. In the events realm, we bring a number of experts and nationally known speakers to campus to address students, faculty, and the larger community about issues of mass incarceration, the need for change, the need to solve problems over there. When these problems are brought up, we find great support from the administration. We find that there is funds available, that there's people willing to advertise our events, willing to back us up, willing to show that students on Princeton's campus are involved in meaningful efforts to change a problem that we see in the world. When it comes to advocacy, however, it's a different story. Some of our projects for advocacy, such as the 7x9 solitary confinement demonstration shown here in front of the Student Center, receive support from the university. But again, this is an effort that addresses problems over there, problems that we ourselves can think about, can say are wrong, and push others to change. But they fail to force ourselves to think about our own internal biases, the way that we internalize the system of criminal justice, the way in which we are perpetrating wrongs that we see. So, as we have these advocacy efforts, we ourselves began to think about ways in which the university community and ourselves individually are perpetrating criminal justice in the form in which we see it being corrupt. So in 2014, in January, myself and a number of other SPEAR leaders traveled to New York City to meet with leading advocacy groups. Time and time again, they posed us the question of, if we understand the criminal justice system is biased, if we understand that it's broken, if we understand that something must change, what can we ourselves be doing to break down the barriers to those who have criminal convictions, to those who have been stigmatized by a system for which many of them have been exposed multiple times, largely because of socioeconomic biases? So they asked us, what is Princeton University doing to further this question? What are they doing wrong? So we sat back and thought, when myself and many of my friends apply to Princeton, we worry about cover letters, we worry about resumes, we worry about personal statements, we worry about ways in which we can depict ourselves as a broad-based applicant and paint a large picture of who we are and why Princeton should want us. For a select number of applicants, however, there's one question apart from these that stands out. This question on the common application, of which Princeton and 200 other universities use, asks the following: have you ever been adjudicated guilty or convicted of a misdemeanor, felony, or other crime? And then you'll notice there's a number of provisions basically saying, if you had a lawyer that's good enough to get off, you probably can get off. So, so we kind of started thinking about this question and asking ourselves, by asking this question, what are we really asking about an 18-year-old applicant to Princeton who in all other ways might be qualified to get into the university? And I would argue we're really asking her a few questions. What's the color of your skin? Where'd you grow up? And what kind of socioeconomic background do you come from? Do any of these questions tell us anything about an academic, the academic achievements or possibilities for an applicant or their moral character? I think not. In doing so and thinking about this campaign largely, we began to circulate a petition within the university calling on university leaders to remove this question from the application for undergraduate admission. We quickly gathered 500 signatures and arranged meetings individually with the president of the university, Christopher Eisgruber, the dean of the college, Valerie Smith, and the dean of the dean of admissions, Janet Rappley. All of them met with us and broadly agreed that the criminal justice system was broken. They said, yes, they see racial biases manifesting. They see the problems that we also see. However, they all disagree with our premise that this question should be removed. They cited that a lack of safety could arise from this question, that we could be letting in people that would make our campus unsafe, that would make it the kind of place that Princeton seeks to avoid being. We all have this safe haven, and that would break that down. I would like to challenge that idea of safety, however, for a minute. If we also reflect on 2015, and many of you will be familiar with Princeton, in the wake of the events in Ferguson and Staten Island, a number of students have started to speak out about ways in which they themselves feel marginalized on campus, in which they themselves do not feel welcome, in which they struggle to find a place at Princeton's campus, and many of them often look elsewhere to find support. So are we really fostering a campus that is safe, a campus that is secure, a campus that is welcoming for all? I think not. And in doing so, we should push to remove this question. So we're relaunching a campaign this year that we started last year called the Admissions Opportunity Campaign. And this question broadly pushes, as I've outlined, to remove this question. It asks Princeton students to sign a petition, which will largely be brought to the administration, calling upon the Common App to remove all questions related to past involvement with the justice system from the application for admission. So if you're interested, on May 7th at 2 p.m., there'll be a teach-in, but more broadly, I think that it's something that we should all think about, ways in which our practices are furthering stigmas of criminal convictions for those who we interact with in our lives. It's easy to have the category of the problems over there, the people over there, the criminals who exist in our lives, and the people right here, the people that are safe, the people that we feel comfortable with, the people that are like us. But I think that's dangerous. I think that we need to break that down. I think we need to question ourselves also on an individual level. So when many of us talk about criminal justice, when we talk about problems going on, we use words such as the following: inmate, convict, prisoner, felon, offender, the list goes on. However, at Spear, and I think more broadly within the reform community, following the example set by many formerly incarcerated people, we have sought to move towards the language illustrated on the bottom: incarcerated individual, incarcerated person, incarcerated people, etc. In doing so, we force ourselves and those who listen to us to talk to reflect upon the ways in which our language and our actions reflect our beliefs in the criminal justice system and what it really tells us about a person. This is not to say, however, that Princeton is a place that is fine. In fact, we should call on the administration, and I urge all of you to look into ways in which you can call upon those in your life to think more deeply about the ways in which criminal convictions perpetrate a system of inequality and social injustice that we witness. In closing, I'd like to suggest that both this component of language and this component of action can be thought about in a broader, more historical context. At Princeton, we see a history of slavery, we see a history of discrimination, a history of injustice that has been with us for 250 years. Does not that give us the moral imperative to push further, to be a leader for social change, to instead of changing with the times, to cause the times to change? If in doing so, we can look at questions of mass incarceration, of other issues, and come together and found a more just, a more equal, a more fair world. Thank you.